Within the thick woodlands of northern New York State, 143 unidentified burial sites were uncovered in 1862 under the wooden floors of a deserted chapel. Local officials recorded that every skeleton displayed evidence of methodical torture, broken bones that had mended prior to death, signs of repeated attempts at drowning, and peculiar symbols etched into their skeletal remains. For more than 160 years, government files concerning the Church of the Pure Spirit stayed classified, available only to individuals possessing special authorization. I have acquired papers, previously unrevealed to the general public, that outlined how 3 siblings known as Elder Ezra, Deacon Silas, and Prophet Caleb Ravencroft persuaded hundreds of faithful adherents that pain was the sole route to salvation, and how their sinister cleansing ceremonies resulted in what could be America's most disturbing religious sect. That the modest community of Ravenwood in northern New York appeared ordinary in most respects during the early 1800s, situated among gentle hills and thick woodlands roughly 40 miles north of Albany. It housed approximately 300 residents who earned their livelihood through agriculture, lumber, and commerce with surrounding settlements. The settlement had been established in 1803 by pioneers traveling northward from the Hudson Valley in search of productive soil and fresh possibilities. Similar to much of northern New York, during this era Ravenwood positioned itself at the center of what historians would eventually term the Second Great Awakening, an era of profound religious revival that spread throughout America in the early 1800s. This region became recognized as the burned-over district because of the intensity of religious movements that appeared to spark and spread like flames across its communities. It represented a time when fresh denominations emerged, traditional beliefs faced questioning, and magnetic preachers could attract audiences numbering in the thousands to outdoor revival gatherings. Into this spiritual chaos came the Raven siblings during the summer of 1825. Elder Ezra, the oldest at 42, possessed the commanding aura of someone accustomed to receiving obedience. His deeply set eyes, appearing nearly black under certain lighting, seemed capable of penetrating one's soul when he discussed divine subjects. Deacon Silas, aged 39, appeared more academic with wire-framed glasses and slender fingers constantly stained with ink from his endless composition of religious writings. Prophet Caleb, the youngest at 35, had a disturbing quality that many found simultaneously appealing and unsettling. He communicated in whispers that somehow reached across packed rooms, and his pale blue eyes would frequently roll backward during what he claimed were divine revelations. The siblings arrived possessing considerable wealth, acquiring a large plot of land at the town's edge where they immediately commenced building what they termed the Church of the Pure Spirit. Unlike the basic white clapboard meeting houses typical throughout New England and New York, their church was constructed from dark stone excavated from nearby hills. Its design was distinctive, a central 8-sided sanctuary encircled by 8 smaller chambers, with a spire ascending to a height that appeared excessive for such an isolated location. Most notable was the lack of windows in the primary sanctuary, with illumination provided solely by strategically placed lanterns during worship services. "The Spirit has summoned us to this location," Elder Ezra declared at their initial gathering, which curiosity had made well attended despite initial doubt from locals. "In an era of false prophets and lukewarm belief, we deliver the genuine message of purification through hardship. The Spirit has shown us that this community shall serve as the birthplace of fresh understanding." The siblings had timed their arrival perfectly. The religious environment of 1825 America was fractured and uncertain. Traditional denominations such as Episcopalians and Presbyterians were losing influence to more emotional and expressive faiths. Methodists were gaining followers through circuit riders who brought passionate sermons to the frontier. Baptists were expanding rapidly with their focus on individual conversion experiences, and new American-born religions were emerging. The Mormons would begin their journey just 1 year later and less than 100 miles away. When Joseph Smith published the Book of Mormon in 1830, in this climate of spiritual searching, the Ravencrofts' message discovered fertile ground. Their teaching was deceptively straightforward initially. Genuine salvation could only be attained through suffering that burned away sin and impurity. They referenced biblical passages about refinement through fire and Christ's suffering on the cross. However, what set their teaching apart was the literal interpretation. Physical suffering was not merely symbolic but essential for spiritual cleansing. The flesh serves as the container of sin, Deacon Silas would explain during early sermons, his voice measured and rational. Therefore the flesh must be tested, tried, and purified through tribulation. Only when the body has been broken can the spirit truly soar. Their congregation expanded steadily throughout that first year. The siblings were selective regarding who could join, requiring potential members to undergo a discernment interview with Prophet Caleb, who would determine if they were worthy vessels for purification. Those accepted were predominantly from three groups: the desperately poor seeking community and purpose, the deeply troubled seeking redemption from past sins, and the wealthy seeking spiritual experiences beyond what traditional churches offered. Margaret Wilkins was among the first converts, a widow who had lost her husband and 2 children to scarlet fever the previous winter. She had been contemplating ending her life when she encountered Elder Ezra in town. He looked at me as though he could see my thoughts, she wrote in a journal later discovered by federal investigators. He told me my suffering had meaning, that it was preparing me for a greater purpose. For the first time since burying my family, I felt something other than despair. By 1827, the Church of the Pure Spirit had grown to nearly 100 members. Some resided in simple dwellings built around the church, while others maintained homes in Ravenwood, but spent most of their time at the church compound. The Ravencrofts encouraged members to donate their property and savings to the church, explaining that worldly attachments prevent spiritual elevation. The most devoted followers were invited to become vessels of the Spirit, a special status that required them to undergo more intensive purification rituals. These early ceremonies were relatively mild compared to what would come later: extended fasting, night-long prayer vigils, and rituals involving ice-cold water that symbolized the drowning of the sinful self. What few outsiders realized was how methodically the Ravencrofts were escalating the intensity of these practices. Like the proverbial frog in slowly heating water, their followers were being conditioned to accept increasingly extreme forms of purification without recognizing the dangerous path they were traveling. By 1829, when construction began on an extensive network of chambers beneath the church, the Ravencrofts had established complete control over their followers' lives, thoughts, and body. The stage was set for darkness to descend upon the Church of the Pure Spirit, as Prophet Caleb reportedly told his brothers in a private meeting documented years later. The sheep have been gathered. Now begins the true work of the shepherd. The people of Ravenwood would soon discover that the Ravencroft Brothers' definition of shepherd had little to do with protection and everything to do with sacrifice. The descent into transformation of the Church of the Pure Spirit from an unusual but seemingly harmless religious community to something far more sinister can be traced to a specific date: December 21, 1829, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. What occurred that night would later be referred to in secret church documents as the First Ascension and would establish the pattern for the horrors that followed. The day began with an announcement from Elder Ezra that Prophet Caleb had received a profound vision during the night. The entire congregation was summoned to the church for what was described as a revelation of the next level of purification. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped below freezing, nearly 150 followers filled the windowless sanctuary, which was illuminated only by 12 large candles positioned at the points of an enormous pattern carved into the wooden floor, a spiral that wound inward toward a central platform. Thomas Hartford, a blacksmith who had joined the church 6 months earlier, following the death of his wife, later escaped and provided testimony about what happened next. According to Hartford, Elder Ezra addressed the congregation with unusual intensity, his voice rising to a fever pitch as he described how their previous purification rituals had been merely preparation for the true cleansing. "Brothers and sisters," Elder Ezra proclaimed, "we have been patient shepherds, guiding you gently toward understanding, but the Spirit grows impatient with our progress. Tonight, Prophet Caleb has been shown the true path to salvation, and it requires greater courage than we have yet demanded." While the brothers maintained their distinct roles, Elder Ezra as the authoritative voice, Deacon Silas as the scholarly theologian, and Prophet Caleb as the mystical conduit to the divine, their private dynamic shifted over time. According to accounts from former Inner Circle members, Caleb's influence grew as his visions directed ever more aspects of church life. By 1840, it was Caleb who selected all candidates for elevation and determined the specific rituals to be used in each case. His mental state appears to have deteriorated significantly during this period. Journal entries attributed to him, recovered from a hidden compartment in his private quarters, reveal increasingly incoherent writings interspersed with detailed anatomical drawings. One entry from 1842 reads, The Spirit has revealed that souls reside not merely in the heart or mind, as commonly thought, but are distributed throughout the body in specific nodes. Each elevation allows me to map these sacred points more precisely. Soon I shall have the complete divine anatomy. As the church's membership grew to nearly 300 by 1845, the Ravencrofts faced the practical challenge of disposing of evidence from their increasing number of elevations. This led to one of their most macabre innovations, the selling of human remains to medical schools. In the mid-19th century, medical colleges struggled to obtain cadavers for anatomical study. Legal sources were limited, primarily to executed criminals, leaving an insufficient supply for teaching purposes. This created a black market for bodies, with resurrection men illegally exhuming the recently buried or claiming unclaimed bodies from poorhouses. Deacon Silas, whose scholarly pursuits had given him connections in academic circles, established relationships with agents who supplied medical schools in Albany, New York City, and as far away as Philadelphia. Church records indicate that between 1840 and 1845, at least 67 vessels were donated to the advancement of medical science, a euphemism for the sale of murder victims' bodies. This commercial aspect served multiple purposes for the Raven. It disposed of evidence, generated significant income for the church, and provided Deacon Silas with access to medical knowledge that he incorporated into the cult's practices. From these transactions, he learned improved preservation techniques and more efficient methods of causing pain without leaving external marks, knowledge that would make the church's later atrocities even more sophisticated. By 1845, the Church of the Pure Spirit had evolved from a fringe religious group into something unprecedented, a self-sustaining system of indoctrination, ritual murder, and profit disguised as spiritual advancement. The brothers had created what one federal investigator would later call a perfect machine for evil, operating in plain sight under the protection of religious freedom. Yet despite their careful management of appearances, rumors began to spread. The sheer number of people who had joined the church only to disappear from public life raised questions. Former members who had fled rarely spoke openly about their experiences, fearing either disbelief or retaliation, but their haunted expressions and reluctance to discuss their time with the Ravencrofts fueled local suspicions. It was these growing murmurs, combined with an unexpected discovery by a postal inspector investigating financial irregularities, that would eventually draw official attention to the quiet horror unfolding in Raven. But that reckoning still lay years in the future. For now, the Church of the Pure Spirit continued its dark work, its true nature hidden beneath layers of religious respectability and the fervent devotion of followers who had been taught to see murder as the highest form of worship. The public face of the Church of the Pure Spirit reached its zenith during the late 1840s. To the outside world, the Ravencroft brothers appeared to be successful religious leaders riding the wave of the Second Great Awakening. Their compound had expanded to include not only the main church building and underground chambers, but also dormitories for single members, modest homes for families, workshops where church goods were produced, and even a small school for the children of followers. Visitors to Ravenwood often commented on the prosperity and orderliness of the church community. The Ravencrofts were particularly careful about who they allowed onto their property, generally limiting access to potential converts who had been carefully vetted or to respected community figures they wished to impress. During these sanctioned visits, what outsiders saw was an industrious religious community where members worked together, prayed together, and supported one another. What remained invisible was the web of psychological control, the nighttime rituals in the underground chambers, and the steadily increasing number of elevations. Also hidden was the growing wealth of the Ravencroft brothers, amassed through donations from followers, the sale of human remains to medical schools, and various businesses operated under church auspices, but primarily benefiting the bros. The first significant thread that would eventually unravel their carefully constructed facade appeared in 1847, when James Thornhill, a postal inspector investigating financial irregularities in several upstate New York communities, noticed unusual patterns in banking transactions connected to the Church of the Pure Spirit. Large sums deposited at irregular intervals, always in cash, Thornhill noted in his official report. Amounts consistent with institutional deposits rather than individual banking. Transfers to medical colleges in Albany, Philadelphia, and Baltimore with vague notations regarding research donations. Thornhill's investigation might have remained focused solely on potential financial improprieties had he not encountered Martha Simmons, a former church member who had fled the community after witnessing her sister's elevation in 1846, initially reluctant to speak about her experiences, Simmons eventually provided Thornhill with the first official testimony about the true nature of the Ravencrofts' activities. She spoke of rituals involving torture, of bodies kept in underground chambers, of children being selected for special blessings and never seen again. Thornhill wrote, "Claims so outlandish that I would have dismissed them as the ravings of a disturbed mind, had they not aligned so perfectly with the financial irregularities I'd already documented." Thornhill brought his concerns to his superiors, but the response was tepid at best. Religious freedom was strongly protected, and accusations against the church required extraordinary evidence, without permission to pursue an official investigation. Thornhill continued gathering information privately, creating a network of contacts around Ravenwood who could report on the church's activities. One such contact was Dr. William Garrett, a physician in Albany who had grown suspicious about the condition of cadavers he examined that allegedly came from the Church of the Pure Spirit. Standard practice was to receive bodies of the deceased who had donated their remains to medical science, Garrett later testified, but these specimens showed signs of systematic antemortem trauma, injuries sustained before death that had partially healed, and the manner of death itself was consistent across multiple bodies, evidence of asphyxiation combined with extreme physical stress. In 1850, Garrett secretly reached out to Thornhill, providing detailed medical reports on 7 bodies he had examined. These documents provided the first scientific evidence that something sinister was occurring at the Church of the Pure Spirit. Still, authorities remained reluctant to act against a religious organization without irrefutable proof of criminal activity. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In the spring of 1851, Prophet Caleb Ravencroft's mental state, which had been deteriorating for years, reached a crisis point. According to accounts from church members who later testified, he began experiencing violent episodes where he would rave about spirits emerging from the walls and the divine anatomy becoming visible in the air. During church services, his prophetic utterances became increasingly bizarre and frightening, even to the most devoted followers. Elder Ezra and Deacon Silas attempted to manage the situation by limiting Prophet Caleb's public appearances, explaining his absences as periods of intense communion with the Spirit. In private, however, they confined him to a specially constructed room in the furthest reaches of the underground chambers, where his screams would not be heard above ground. This confinement might have contained the immediate problem had Prophet Caleb not escaped during a momentary lapse in supervision. On the night of June 17, 1851, he somehow freed himself from his restraints and made his way through the catacombs to emerge in the woods beyond the church property. What followed was described in the Albany Evening Journal as a scene of public madness unprecedented in the region's history. Naked and covered in self-inflicted wounds, Prophet Caleb appeared in Ravenwood's town square during a community gathering celebrating the summer planting. Before a crowd of horrified onlookers, he proclaimed himself the living vessel of the pure spirit and began describing in explicit detail the rituals conducted beneath the church. "The blood of the purified strengthens our connection to the divine," he reportedly shouted. 207 vessels have been emptied, and the Spirit has filled me with their essence. The chambers beneath hold the sacred remains of the elevated, and soon all of you shall join them in glorious suffering. Local authorities detained Prophet Caleb, initially believing him to be simply a dangerous lunatic. When he identified himself as one of the Ravencroft brothers, however, his ravings took on new significance. Thornhill, who had cultivated relationships with several local officials, was notified immediately. He arrived in Ravenwood the following day to interview Prophet Caleb. What he found was a man in the final stages of complete psychological collapse. Prophet Caleb alternated between periods of catatonic silence and frenzied confession, during which he provided details about the church's activities that corroborated earlier testimonies from escaped members. Most significantly, he drew detailed maps of the underground chambers, including locations of hidden entrances and the Chamber of Saints where victims' remains were kept. Armed with this new evidence and Prophet Caleb's first-hand testimony, Thornhill finally secured authorization for an official investigation. However, word of Prophet Caleb's detention and subsequent questioning reached Elder Ezra and Deacon Silas before authorities could organize a proper search of the church grounds. What happened next demonstrated the brothers' ruthless efficiency. In crisis management, within hours of learning of Prophet Caleb's detention, they initiated what church records later revealed was a contingency plan called the Cleansing Flame. Members of the inner circle were dispatched to remove the most incriminating evidence from the underground chambers, particularly financial records and the most recently deceased bodies. Then, in a move that showed both desperation and calculated cunning, they orchestrated a controlled fire in the main church building. The fire was carefully set to destroy specific areas while leaving others intact, creating the appearance of a tragic accident rather than deliberate destruction of evidence. By the time authorities arrived with a search warrant on June 19, 1851, they found the church building partially burned and the congregation engaged in recovery efforts. Elder Ezra greeted officials with apparent cooperation, expressing shock at his brother's mental breakdown and offering full access to the property. "It seems God has tested us doubly," he reportedly told investigators. "First with the affliction of my beloved brother's mind, and now with this terrible fire. But we shall rebuild, as faith must always rise from ashes." The investigation that followed was hampered not only by the fire damage but by the brothers' meticulous preparation. The entrance to the main tunnel system had been collapsed in the fire, making access difficult. When excavation finally revealed the underground chambers, investigators found them partially flooded, a result of deliberately diverted water from a nearby stream. Many rooms had been emptied of their contents, with evidence of hasty removal. Nevertheless, enough remained to confirm the most disturbing aspects of Prophet Caleb's confession. In chambers that had escaped both fire and flooding, investigators discovered specialized restraints, tools modified for torture, and chemical compounds used in embalming. Most damning was the Chamber of Saints, where, despite efforts to remove evidence, dozens of human remains were found in various states of preservation. "The scene defies adequate description," wrote federal investigator Daniel Blackwood in his official report. Skeletal remains arranged in poses of supplication, partially preserved corpses seated as though participating in some macabre congregation, and most disturbing, small chambers containing the remains of children, positioned as though at play but bearing clear evidence of violent deaths. The discovery shocked even hardened investigators. Newspaper accounts, though heavily censored due to Victorian sensibilities, conveyed enough details to create widespread horror. The Albany Evening Journal's headline on June 25, 1851, read simply, "House of Worship Revealed as Charnel House, Brothers Accused of Unspeakable Acts in the Name of Religion." As authorities worked to identify the remains and determine the full extent of the Ravencrofts' crimes, Elder Ezra and Deacon Silas maintained their innocence. They claimed that Prophet Caleb had conducted his activities in secret, without their knowledge or approval, and expressed shock and dismay at the discoveries. Given their careful compartmentalization of church operations, this defense might have carried some weight had it not been for one final, damning piece of evidence. In a hidden compartment beneath Deacon Silas's personal quarters, investigators discovered a leather-bound ledger documenting every elevation from 1829 to 1851. The book, written in Deacon Silas's distinctive handwriting, contained names, dates, descriptions of methods used, and notations regarding the disposition of remains, including those sold to medical institutions. Most incriminating were entries specifically attributing direction and participation to all three brothers, with special mention of Elder Ezra's role in selecting candidates for elevation. This ledger, combined with testimony from former members and Prophet Caleb's confession, provided overwhelming evidence of the brothers' guilt. On July 3, 1851, Elder Ezra and Deacon Silas Ravencroft were arrested on multiple charges of murder, fraud, and desecration of human remains. The case against the Ravencroft brothers would become one of the most sensational trials of the mid-19th century. Though much of the most disturbing evidence was kept from public view by authorities concerned about its potential impact on public morality and religious sensibilities, the investigation continued to uncover new horrors, expanding well beyond the events at the church itself to include the brothers' earlier activities and the full network of their operations. But even as the legal process moved forward, the darkest secrets of the Church of the Pure Spirit remained hidden, awaiting discovery by those who would continue to investigate long after the Ravencrofts had faced justice. As the investigation into the Church of the Pure Spirit deepened, through the summer of 1851, authorities found themselves confronting a criminal enterprise far more extensive than initially believed. The Ravencroft brothers had created not merely a cult with aberrant practices, but an intricate system that extended tendrils into multiple aspects of American society, religious, medical, and financial. Elder Ezra and Deacon Silas remained in custody awaiting trial, while Prophet Caleb had been committed to the state lunatic asylum at Utica, deemed mentally unstable to stand trial. Their followers, meanwhile, had scattered, some fleeing to avoid prosecution, others remaining in Ravenwood in a state of shock and disbelief, their entire worldview shattered by the revelations. Federal investigator Daniel Blackwood, assigned to lead the case, established a temporary office in Ravenwood to coordinate the sprawling investigation. As he pieced together evidence from church records, witness testimonies, and forensic examinations, a disturbing timeline emerged that stretched back even before the brothers' arrival in upstate New York. The Ravencrofts did not begin their crimes in Ravenwood, Blackwood wrote in a confidential report to his superiors in Washington. Evidence suggests similar activities in at least 3 previous locations, dating back to 1817. In each case, they established a religious community, gathered vulnerable followers, and departed before authorities became suspicious. What distinguishes Ravenwood is not the nature of their activities, but their duration and scale. Records recovered from a hidden vault beneath Deacon Silas's quarters revealed that the brothers had operated under different names in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Ohio before settling in New York. In each location, they had refined their methods, learning from mistakes and developing the theological framework that would eventually become the doctrine of the Church of the Pure Spirit. Most disturbing was evidence suggesting the brothers had not acted entirely alone. Correspondence between Deacon Silas and individuals at several medical colleges indicated knowledge, if not explicit awareness, of the illicit source of the specimens being provided. One letter from a prominent Philadelphia anatomist, dated 1844, praised the exceptional quality and unique preparation of bodies received from the church, noting that the subjects show evidence of systematic anatomical study prior to death, as though the bodies were prepared for our work while still living. This revelation opened a new and horrifying dimension to the case. The Ravencrofts had not merely been killing their followers in the name of religious purification, they had been conducting systematic experiments on living subjects, documenting their findings, and selling both the bodies and their research to medical institutions. The brothers appeared to have been conducting a form of primitive physiological research. Dr. Samuel Prescott of the Albany Medical College stated in his expert testimony to investigators, "The patterns of injury, the methods of preserving tissue, and the detailed anatomical notes suggest an attempt to study human responses to various stimuli, particularly pain and its effects on the body's systems." In August 1851, the investigation took an unexpected turn when a respected physician from Boston came forward with information that transformed understanding of the case. Dr. Jonathan Crane had been a student at Harvard Medical School in the late 1820s, where he had briefly encountered a visiting lecturer named Simon Ravenwood, who presented controversial